you've been getting more into scripture. I saw your video that you made on choosing a Bible.
Yes.
That was good.
It was a long
Um,
process. Yeah.
so how has, as you've been reading it more and studying it more, how has that impacted your theology?
It's just been really, I think the salvation history part has really come to the fore in seeing God's providence throughout history. Um, and also just encountering books of the Bible that I kind of blew through before and kind of didn't pay much attention to, and how much I actually really like them. Like the Book of Numbers, I found fascinating. Like I was like, oh, this is really cool. And I just went through First Samuel, and I don't know. It's just like seeing God's providence working and how He's, and also I think it's helped me sort of reflect on my own personal life, like where you see God doing marvelous things for the people of God, and then in short order they're complaining He's not doing enough, or constantly whining about this, that, or the other thing, and how hard they got it, and just seeing the constant temptations of forgetting what God has done, taking it for granted, and what that means on a personal dimension. And so it's just been really helpful to me personally. I think Scripture is often forgotten, unfortunately, and it really is an important. I think we're afraid of it sometimes. We're not going to get it because I do think in some sense we can be overly desirous for clean, and this is part of our Latin patrimony. We like things to be defined, orderly, almost juridical, where every dot is exactly clear, written in clear language, and everything is, which is not Eastern at all. Like, so if you look at like Eastern Catholics and Eastern Orthodox, they're like, what are you doing? You're trying to find mystery to death until it's no longer mystery. Like, stop it. Like,
Yeah.
be in awe of the mystery of before you. Like, stop trying to dissect it. Like we Latins love to dissect things. It's sort of in our blood. And I think for that reason we can be afraid of Scripture, because we're like, oh well, if we try to dissect this, I'm might have difficulties trying to reconcile it or see how it all fits, or because there's so many layers to it, and sometimes it's just reporting bad things people did and misunderstandings they had. It's not always how you determine what's what can be complicated, and a lot of it's just messy. You're dealing with God's interaction with sinful people in really far removed historical and social and even religious contexts. It can be daunting, but I think it's important. So I think it's just, for me, I do think, along with Ratzinger, that especially the Scripture, but especially the New Testament, is the soul of theology. It really is. And if that's not the basis of our theology, we have a problem. And I think there has been a tendency to move away from that I think we need to recover.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. I totally agree. One thing I've been thinking about recently is, when you look at Scripture, you have what God calls, each of the mediators. You have, Abraham, you have David, Moses. I think about the calling, right? And then I think about my own life, or with our calling, our vocation, right? And what I've noticed is that the distraction to the call, the way the battle works, it's still good things that's veering you off. Do you know what I mean? And so you don't hear a
Yeah.
lot of people like totally passionate about like just talking about their vocation in some ways, which I think they should, obviously, because that's their calling from God. But what often happens is we might have some good things before us, right? But they're really not our main priority. Do you know what I
Right.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes it seems like we can be passionate about good things, maybe about helping people learn or this and that, or apostolate and stuff like that, which is important, but it's not the primary thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So I've just been thinking about that, looking at, have read Scripture, it's come to my mind, and I've thought about it lately. Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, it's true, because there's always a tough balancing act. Is And I think it's especially true for men, and because we're often work oriented, and that's whether or not it's in secular business or in apostolate work or in teaching. We tend to obsess about our work because that we identify ourselves with our work. Men are workers in some sense, and it can be difficult, because then if you start neglecting your family, that becomes a problem, because then in some ways you're not living what you're teaching if you're a theologian or and whatnot, or that your primary responsibility is your vocation. It's not your job.
Right.
And so keeping that to the fore, like if your family's being hurt by your over dedication to work, there's a problem, because you're supposed to work to help support your family. That's so that your family shouldn't take second fiddle.
Right.
And that's not always easy. It's a balancing act, but it's important to keep that in mind. I think you're right. I think having a firm grasp on the vocation is essential.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't hear too much about that either. So it's just something I've been thinking about lately. Another thing that I've thought about too, I wanted to bounce off you is, it seems like sometimes I'll talk to Catholics and it's almost like they want to create a subculture. Does that make sense? So it's like they want to have a subculture within the culture of like where they live. Like, so if in their mind, it seems like they want to have like this perfect, like just surround me with a bunch of like holy Catholics.
Right.
Give me I want a very reverent liturgy, and we would be fine. Like, we just need our quiet space and our beautiful liturgy, and then we can just do our own thing. You know what I mean? And when you look at scripture and you look at, the church fathers, when you look at the first centuries of the church, I don't see any kind of similarities there. So I don't know. What do you think on that?
It's actually something very recently that's been on my mind a lot. So it's kind of providential that you brought it up. So I had no idea you were going to talk about this, but it's something I've been reflecting on a lot lately. I understand the appeal of that, especially if you're raising children and you're looking at a crazy world where everything around you is like really bad, that there's an idea, okay, let's just protect. So your first instinct is, let's go into the helm. Let's go into the gated castle and with the fortified walls and keep everyone out. The problem with that, though, is that we're the church militant, right? And the church militant is called to go into battle. Now, it's important to realize that the spiritual battle is the only battle we fight for the sake of our human enemies. So we're actually fighting for our enemies, not Satan and his minions, but those that he's duped. So the very people, just like Jesus prayed for the people nailing him to the cross, right? We need to be praying for and loving the very people we're trying to conquer with the love of Christ and the truth of the gospel. It also reminds me of the parable of the talents. If you bury what you've been given in the dirt and then go back to God and say, look, I kept it pure, he's going to rebuke you, because you were supposed to invest it in gain. He expected a return on the investment. He's expecting it to grow, which means you have to risk it in a sense. He might be more forgiving of you if you lose a little bit of it when you were trying to make it earn interest, right, than if you didn't at all. Because you basically, by burying it and keeping it under wraps, is ensuring that it doesn't achieve his purpose, which is to spread. And as Jesus said, you don't light a lamp and hide it under a bushel basket. You're supposed to shine out in the world. The whole notion of raising the bastions, of tearing down the dividing walls, of opening up the hatches, even from Vatican II phrasing, was not to let the world in. It was to stop being in an enclave mentality that prevented us from engaging the world. The church is essentially a missionary body. It is meant to go forth and to dialogue with these people. And I think while it can seem virtuous to just try to make our own little enclave and make our own little special village where everyone's holy and everyone goes to the same liturgy that's perfect and there's no aberrations, highly desirable. I get it. It's trying to return when in reality it's trying to strive for heaven. And unfortunately, in this fallen world, that means going into the battle. Retreating can actually be a form of cowardice, right? Because it's really what's at bottom there is this fear that if I go out into the wider world and engage, or if I allow my family to engage the wider world, then they might be harmed. Well, every battle, there's a danger of being scarred. But it's the job of the soldier to face that, right? The virtue of fortitude and or courage is facing the danger when you have to, right? And you can't fail to do that. You have to encounter. You're supposed to be bringing the gospel to your workplace. You're supposed to be bringing it to your neighbors and to the world around you and to your local school, to your local government. There's community around you. And that means you can't have this mentality that I'm just going to associate with other devout Catholics, because we're supposed to be converting other people. And that happens primarily through witness. Mm-hmm. And you can't be a witness if you're just holed up in your own little hovel somewhere.